Anyone? This gentleman graduated from UT Law School and has a commercial and civil litigation practice and one of the most solid histories of community service in Plano, and I think he's an original Plano son of Plano. So, Anthony, come on up. Let's get going on this. So what we're going to do tonight is a couple of different things. I'm going to join Anthony up here. We're going to go through, I think we've got the DART thing has changed from a vote to non-vote, and Anthony's here to kind of take us through that as a DART representative. He also has a bit of a presentation he's going to make. We're going to start off with a couple questions to him, and then I'm going to turn over to him to make his presentation, and he and I will just sort through some different things that ultimately I think hopefully we'll get to maybe even some questions at the end, if you haven't answered them all, which you very well may.
Well, I doubt I will have answered them all, but yeah, I'm happy to take questions at the end and even to stick around for a little bit to answer some additional questions. But Gary, that was, I will say, that was way too kind of an introduction coming from you, you know.
Especially from me.
Well, and from everyone in this room. I mean, I look around this room, and I think Gary could give a glowing introduction about just about every single person in this room. This is a room filled with dedicated public servants who are really, really engaged in furthering the Plano community. So thank you all for what you do and for being here to hear a little bit more about DART. So,
hey, let me ask you, so let's start off with this, if you don't mind. Let's start talking originally about how you got appointed to DART, how that worked, and then what are you responsible for in that role? Can we start with that?
Absolutely. Okay, well, yeah, let's get comfortable. Okay.
Get my head out of this thing.
Oh, yeah. We're doing like silhouettes. I remember in 5th grade at Sagley Elementary School, there was some kind of, they made silhouettes of your head and you cut them out. And I think that's what we're doing here. So anyway, no, in all seriousness, so I was appointed toward the end of my 8 years on the Plano City Council. I thought I was out the door. I had already told my wife, Liesl, that we were going to have more free time. And then, I got a call from Mark Israelson, the city manager, saying that he and the mayor had talked about it and that, would I consider serving on the DART board, because our prior representative in that spot, Paul Wageman, who was an excellent DART board member for about a decade, I believe. I mean, for many, many years. Paul just served fantastically on the DART board. And, he had decided it was time to move along. And so we had an opening. And so, I was very blessed that as I was wrapping up my tenure on the council, my colleagues appointed me to this position, which is a little bit of a different role than my role on the council. My role on the council, I was elected by the people, and accountable only to the voters. We have 3 current and former council members here. I hope I'm not missing anybody, but so you all know how that goes. But this role is a little bit different because I'm appointed by the council and report to the council, and so it's more of an ambassadorial role where I'm both a board member for DART and thus helping to make decisions for that entity, and also sort of an ambassador for Plano on the DART board. And so it's a bit of a different role in that way, but one that I've enjoyed as I did my time on the council.
Well, I think most of us that know you well are really glad that you're in that seat. I personally know I am. Hey, so let me ask you about this before we get to your presentation here. So can you share something on why you think the Plano City Council, in your opinion, whatever you're comfortable with, and I know you're an ambassador, so there's certain things maybe that you'll be comfortable with or not, but having been so involved in all of that all the way back to where you guys started challenging the performance of DART, especially in relation to the value that some of us perceived Plano was getting. And I think all of us believe that public transport is a very important element of the community. So 2 questions. Why did the city council, you think, vote unanimously to put it on the ballot? And then what changed so they took it off? And maybe that then can lead to your presentation. Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, we have a current council member here, and Sean Thomas over here, and 2 former council members in Shelby Williams and Julie Holmer. So, I don't know that I'm uniquely well positioned to answer that question. In fact, I think that Sean is probably better positioned to answer a question about what?
She wasn't on when they voted to take it off. I'm sorry, when they voted to call the election.
Right, yeah. When they voted to call the election, but you were on when you voted to pull it off, and that's what I meant. The second part of the question, but okay. But thank you for keeping me honest, Bill. For a second, I thought I had my timeline really
I have
wrong.
the dates.
Yeah. Okay, then yeah, you got all the dates in your memory. That's great, Bill. So anyway, but anyway, so I think the reason that the Plano City Council put it on the ballot, probably will be addressed more in the presentation I was going to make, because Julie knows that it's actually the presentation that we gave to the Collin County Homeless Coalition last year, and I figured I just wanted everybody to have that background to your point of how did we get here, why was this happening in the first place, what are some of the issues that Plano has faced with DART, and then as far as why they canceled the election, I think it was the result of a lot of negotiations, and first of all, something important that you said, I think everyone recognizes that public transit done right is important. So a lot of people, I think, when the city council called the vote in the first place, tried to portray it as pro-transit versus anti-transit. If you vote yes on this, you're anti-transit. If you vote no, that's how you express that you're pro-transit. Well, I would say this has never been about pro-transit or anti-transit. It's about whether DART was the right partner for the city of Plano to deliver transit services in the community of Plano, and whether the needs of the Plano community were being met by DART at a level of investment from the city of Plano that was commensurate to the services that the citizens of Plano were receiving from DART. And those were really the concerns. So, you saw that even when the election was called, the city council, looked at transit alternatives and
Absolutely.
and ways that there. So even if the election had gone forward and even if the withdrawal had happened, I think it's important to remember that there would still have been transit in Plano. It just,
I think the city council, I think the council knew that we have a responsibility to provide some of that, and hopefully in the most effective way, right?
Amen.
Absolutely. I think something that I've always taken really seriously, and I know that the three current and former council members here, I know take seriously, is that as a council member and as a DART board member, you are a steward of taxpayer resources, and not $1 of that can be wasted, because that's not an acceptable thing to do with the taxpayers' hard-earned money. And so,
And if I could interrupt you, I'm going
Sure.
to take a sideline here. I think out of many of the council members, but I'll speak to you, and I think you frequently led that exact challenge at budget time in challenging exactly how we spent those dollars. And so I always enjoyed your approach to trying to guard those dollars jealously and use them effectively. And I think this was one more example of that early on when we started looking at how they were being spent.
Well, thank you for that, Gary. Certainly, fiscal responsibility is extremely important to me, and I feel like it's been a hallmark of my time on the council, and I'm trying to bring that to the DART board. So, my former colleagues on the council certainly remember that. And I would say that's something we did together. For 4 years in a row, we passed a budget at or near what was initially called the effective tax rate, later became the no new revenue rate. So I think we really, we have had an era of great fiscal responsibility in Plano, and now the challenge that that I don't necessarily have to do the work on anymore is maintaining that in a challenging environment going forward, where Plano has a lot of infrastructure that's coming due for maintenance, what's sometimes referred to as the echo boom, roads, for example, built in the 70s and 80s as Plano's population grew rapidly, coming due for maintenance due to the end of their useful life. And so that's a council issue. That's out of my portfolio now.
Congratulations.
Thank you for that. I'll take that. But
Do you want to jump into your presentation and then maybe come back?
Absolutely.
So let's set this aside. I'm going to give it to you.
Okay,
I'll be
let's
back.
see. Let's see. Hopefully this will work. And as I said, Julie has already seen this presentation, because we gave this together at the Collin County Homeless Coalition last year. So, this is not updated with all of the recent negotiations, the settlement that was reached and everything, but this just kind of gives you the lay of the land of how did we get here? How did the situation arise? So DART, for those who don't know, I think most people here probably do, was created in 1983, funded by 1 cent of sales tax from every member city, and something that I've actually seen reported inaccurately in the media, but I bet everyone here understands, is that that's actually half of each member city sales tax revenue, because when you pay that 8.25% sales tax at the store, 6.25% goes to the state, 6.25 of the 8.25, and then 2 cents is what's called the local option sales tax. And so cities get 2%, they get those 2 cents. And so 1 cent means half of that 2 cents. So DART member cities contribute as much in sales tax to DART as they keep in sales tax for their own budget. They have 1 cent for their budget, and 1 cent is contributed to DART. And I called a reporter a few months ago, and to their credit, they took the call and made a correction in their story, but they had reported that member cities contribute 1% of their sales tax, which would be a very different number. I mean, I think everyone would love to receive really any level of service for 1% of sales tax. That would be, in Plano, that would be, 2-point-something million dollars per year, which would be a lot less than the $120 or so million a year that the city is actually contributing to DART. So important to know what that 1 cent of sales tax means. It's not 1% of sales tax. DART is governed by a board of directors. The directors, of which there are 15, are appointed by the member cities. Plano has 1 full appointment, which is the seat that I'm currently in, and 1 partial appointment shared with Farmers Branch, which is the seat that my colleague Nathan Barbera is in. And then there are 13 other members, 8 of whom are currently appointed by the city of Dallas, though I think, and we'll get to this later, due to some improvements on governance, Dallas, I think, is going to go down to about 45% voting strength on the board from its current, what is 8 out of 15? That's about 53%, somewhere around there. And so hopefully my on-the-spot math was okay there.
It's good.
Yeah, it's somewhere around 53, in that range. But it's more than 50, which is the key point. So we have a system right now, and have since 1983, where if all of the board members from one city, who are all appointed by the same city council, all vote the same way, that's the majority. And so, and I don't know what happened there. I guess my, see, I have a very energy efficient laptop, I guess, and it decided to turn off there. So anyway, that's how DART is governed. Some background: in 2020, Plano requested a return on investment analysis. In the 87th and 88th legislatures in 2021 and 2023, there were legislative efforts to obtain that analysis. And while that did not produce any passed laws, any bills that actually passed or became law, the pressure from that resulted in an Ernst & Young value of transit analysis that came out in 2024, looking at numbers from the year 2023. And in 2025, the results of that study prompted Plano to seek relief from a very large disparity between what Plano spends on DART and the services that Plano gets back from DART. That's reflected in this chart right here, which was prepared by the highly esteemed third-party consulting firm of Ernst & Young. As you can see from this, this is looking at 2023, and these sales tax numbers have only gone up since then, but in 2023, Plano taxpayers paid $109 million into DART, and DART spent $65 million of that in other cities, because as you can see from this chart right here, Plano contributed $109.6 million, $44.6 million was spent in Plano, and in fact, one point that I think is also important is that the expenditures are actually higher than the sales tax collections. Why is that? Because DART has other revenue sources. Sales tax is a huge one, right? But is the primary revenue source for DART, but it is not the only revenue source for DART. So whereas Plano in 2023 paid in $109.6 million from DART, spent only $44.6 million in Plano. Dallas, for example, paid in $407.8 million, but DART spent $690.5 million in Dallas. So whereas Plano was getting about 40 cents on the dollar, for its investment in this 2023 snapshot, Dallas was getting, more than $1.50. In fact, now my mental math on the spot is really going to fail me, but that's probably more like $1.60 or $1.70 per dollar. And so Plano was seeking to recapture some of these funds to provide better service. And so then This has recent news, but as you can see, it has August 12th. Like I said, I didn't create a new PowerPoint for this. This is from last August. But there was talk of a 5% general mobility program and service changes. The City Council had a budget workshop on August 12th that I know former Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Julie Holmer was a part of, still on the council at that time, and continue to advocate for increased service levels, citywide GoLink, shuttles and circulators, and funds to use to improve mobility. On that note, I will point out that during DART's budget process last year, I actually made a motion to amend DART's budget to reallocate some funds from low-performing routes in other cities. And when I say low-performing, these were either low ridership, high subsidy per rider, or both. And when I say subsidy per rider, that's the amount. Basically, when you ride DART, suppose you buy a $3 fare. Well, the cost of delivering that ride to you is a lot more than $3. And so the subsidy per rider is a measure of how much it costs, allocated per rider, minus the amount that was actually recouped in payment from that rider who experienced that ride on DART. And then the rest is the subsidy per rider. And so these were either very high subsidy per rider routes or very low ridership routes or in some cases both. And so I said, okay, these are routes that, are not performing very well. Plano has needs that I think would perform well, and also this huge disparity between what Plano was contributing, it is contributing. I say was because I'm talking about things that happened last year and in the EY study in 2023. But this is still the case. Plano is contributing a lot more than what is being spent in Plano. So I said, well, hey, why don't we take some money from $10 million out of DART's $1.8 billion budget? Why don't we take these $10 million and repurpose them to provide two things Plano is asking for. One, true single zone citywide GoLink microtransit in Plano, and the other, DART paying the entire cost of a circulator shuttle in the Legacy Business Park, which, to be fair, DART policy typically, like for example with the UTD shuttles and things like that, is for DART to pay half and for either a city or an entity like UTD, for example, to pay half of that. But I was saying, given the huge disparity between what Plano was contributing and what Plano was getting in return, it would make sense to for DART to pay the whole cost of that, which that one only would have been like another 1.8 million. But both of those things were voted down during the budget process for DART last year. There were ongoing discussions, a lot of negotiations. I mean, starting back in 2012, before 2021, but certainly during the legislative session in 21 and 23, again in 25. Then there were discussions that I participated in during the 89th legislative session in 2025. Mayor Munz has been a real leader on this issue, and has been just through years of negotiations, and including at the North Texas Commission last year, and after that, having reached no resolution, the Plano City Council called a withdrawal election, and that's the end of my presentation there. But I do have a few more things to say, just because I want to make sure that everyone's aware of this, and I also want to be clear. Gary asked a question at the beginning about my role. The views I'm expressing tonight are my own views. They're not the views of the city of Plano. I'm not representing the city of Plano in any way, except as an appointed member to the DART board, but not like in a, I have no power to speak for the city of Plano, so I want to be very clear that that's not what I'm doing. But a few other points. During the negotiations, the main issues broke down into three buckets: funding, governance, and service. And the funding one we just talked about. Plano is by no means the only what was referred to as donor city in these discussions, but certainly has the biggest dollar amount financial disparity between what Plano contributes and what DART spends in Plano. I will tell you that in fairness, I think it's important to point out that those numbers will be somewhat different with the opening of the Silver Line, which happened late in 2025. So obviously that increases the amount of service that Plano's getting. So I expect that the disparity will be somewhat smaller, but that includes 2 light rail stops. The $44 million expenditure from 2023 already included 2 light rail stops on the red and orange lines. And so, there will be some increase to that $44 million number due to the opening of the Silver Line, but nowhere near bridging that $65 million gap, which is only growing because Plano continues to generate more sales tax every year. It was about 120 million, I believe.
131, I think.
Well, 131 last year. Okay, so 120 I think is a year old. The current number is 131. I'm hearing from former Deputy Mayor Pro Tem Holmer. So I'm even behind the time. So that number continues to grow. So even as the expenditures in Plano grow, the contribution continues to grow as well. The governance issue is really more of an issue for other cities than it was for Plano, to be honest, because the way the DART board is structured, if you're not big enough to have more than half of a seat out of the 15, then you don't get to appoint anybody. You theoretically have a representative that you may share with multiple other cities, but if the vote to appoint that representative, one city has, say, 0.7 of that seat. Farmers Branch is an example. Plano's other rep, Nathan Barbera, is appointed by Plano and Farmers Branch. But in practice, Plano would have the authority, even though I know Plano is a good regional citizen and consults with Farmers Branch, Plano would have the legal authority to just appoint that member unilaterally, because Farmers Branch has a minority of that one seat, so they can't actually have control over even one appointment. So that was another issue that was in those discussions. And then I also want to point out that DART statistics in DART's current fiscal year budget show that Plano has about 4% of the ridership in the overall DART system, but contributes about 14% of the sales tax revenue for the entire system. So that reflects that disparity between sales tax generated in Plano and then DART services generating ridership in Plano. Again, 4% of the ridership, but 14% of the sales tax contribution. Now, there have been a couple of things said there where some would say that maybe this was different in the past because sales tax generation in Plano has grown so much. But if you look at DART's numbers in the current fiscal year budget for DART, there's an exhibit that shows that Plano has actually contributed 13.5% of sales taxes cumulatively since DART's inception, and 14.5% in the current year. So it's grown somewhat, but I mean 13.5 to 14.5 is not a huge difference. So there's probably been this disparity in my view for 40 years now. And I also want to point out something that's encouraging. Plano's ridership is growing faster than most other cities in the DART service area. So so that is a good trend that hopefully will continue and could see the value for Plano improving somewhat in the years to come. Let's see, I think I covered a lot of this. Also, just so that y'all know the lay of the land, the way DART is structured under state law, there's a window 1 year every 6 years where a withdrawal election can be called, and 6 cities called withdrawal elections. 3 of those cities, Plano, Farmers Branch, and Irving, have rescinded those elections. Last I've heard, Addison, Highland Park, and University Park are still moving forward with elections. And then I also just wanted to kind of talk about the recent settlement that led to 3 cities, Plano, Irving, and Farmers Branch, withdrawing the withdrawal elections. So basically the way that's structured is Plano had been requesting through legislation in the 89th session that every member city get back 25% of its sales tax contribution. The settlement includes a goal of getting to that number, although only about 10% is guaranteed. And that's structured as eventually reaching 7.5% of sales tax collections coming back from DART, the Regional Transportation Council kicking in another approximately 2.5%. It's $75 million, which should equal about 2.5%, and that's how you get to 10. And that's over the 6 years. So it starts out actually year one is just 5%. DART kicks in 5%. The RTC does nothing in year one, and then it grows 0.5% on DART's end and 0.5% on the RTC's end every year, so that the next year would be 5.5 from DART and 0.5 from the RTC, and so on and so forth until you get to 7.5 and 2.5. And then there are attempts to get to that 25% by other means, like regional rail being taken over by another entity other than DART, which would free up some DART funds to go back to member cities, and then also possible state LIRAP funds. Apparently there may be funds that are legally have to be spent on transit and are currently unallocated. So some of those funds could potentially come from the state, though you can never count on anything happening during a legislative session. So who knows about that? There's also talk about potentially an additional tax, though, on like a vehicle registration type tax. I personally don't think that's necessary. I think there are other solutions to this, so I would not favor an additional tax. That's my personal view. And then, that's basically where we are. And then another thing that I just wanted to highlight is that because of the concerns over DART's value proposition, most Collin County cities are not members of DART. Frisco is not, Allen's not, McKinney is not.
Right.
Even fast-growing cities to the north of there, like Prosper and Salina, are not. So that's going to be a real challenge for traffic management. Fast-growing Collin County projected to grow from 1 million to 3 million people over the next 25 years, and so something has got to give there. But anyway, with that, I think it's probably a good time to move into our discussion.
Cool, let's do that. I think this last point you made for a lot of us is an interesting point in that we recognize what's happening, especially where we're located geographically with all the cities to the north passing through Plano. Ultimately, we're going to need a solution to that. Before we jump in, I want to do just a couple of things. We have a couple officers here. Constable Sammy Baugh sent some folks out, and in light of everything that's going on in the world, I want to thank our constables for coming in tonight. Thank you very much for coming in. We really appreciate you guys. Here in Collin County and Plano, a lot of us feel very safe, and a lot of it's due to the hard work you guys and your other guys in blue provide. Please send Sammy our best. He was going to be here tonight. His wife was having some medical things done. Please, quick prayer for her, guys. So anyway, we appreciate you guys. Thank you very much. So a couple things, okay?
Yes, sir.
So, how would you propose this new deal versus the old deal, and do you see any gaps that might be quickly able or at some point be able to be addressed? Sitting in there, so how much, so as we're looking at it, it looks like we're going to get, 10% back from what we were? I know there's numbers out there of 25 to 50% back.
So the sort of cap, I don't know if cap is the right word, but the highest number that's being aimed for is 25%. And so when you're talking about next steps, the next steps are to try to get, really two things. First, to try to get other entities to kick in more money for DART, especially the Regional Transportation Council. One thing I'll tell you is that what DART does in the region generates air quality credits and transportation development credits for the whole region. To be honest, I'm not an expert on how that works and how that money comes back from the federal government to the RTC to be allocated to cities and governmental entities in the region. That's kind of been outside of my purview, but I do know that how that process works. DART and the member cities' investment in DART generates at least some of that, and I think it's pretty significant. So and who knows, maybe even all of it. I honestly, haven't been that involved in that, but it's something I'm starting to look at more because, the $75 million from the RTC is great, but when you look at non-member cities, there are 13 cities that are members of DART. Most of the cities in the region are not members of DART. Even the non-member cities are getting, air quality credits and transportation development credits from what I've been told. That's secondhand, but my understanding is that funding that goes to the RTC, gets some of it gets dispersed even to non-member cities, and then there's the obvious literal free rider problem of non-member cities residents coming down and riding DART. And while I'm glad that they're getting a good experience out of DART, that's that's a service that's being delivered to residents of cities that are not paying for DART, because the subsidy per rider is very high. Like, even on light rail, which is a lower subsidy per rider service, it's very common for the subsidy per rider to be, in the $6 to $10 per rider range. So when you're, if you're paying $3 to get on light rail, it probably costs somewhere between, more like $9 to $13 to deliver that ride to you. So when you look at a service that's being so heavily subsidized by the member cities, where the vast majority of it, even on light rail, that's 2/3, 2/3 to 3/4 being paid for by the member cities, not by the rider themselves, then
Certainly there's a gap there, isn't there?
yeah, certainly there's a gap. So if you have somebody from Allen or McKinney or Frisco or other cities come and ride, then, and that's great. I'm glad they can ride, but that means that in addition to the disparities between member cities, where Plano is disadvantaged, all of the member cities collectively are disadvantaged with respect to non-member cities that are still getting the benefit of a regional transit system but not paying in.
Yep.
So,
By the way, another segue. I also want to thank the Chamber of Commerce and our representative back here. Thank you for hosting us tonight and letting us be here. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much in the chamber. Yeah, it's a great room, and we appreciate you having us tonight. So please, thank you, and pass that on. The other thing that's cool is we've got 3 former council, 2 former, 1 sitting council member.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate these folks being here. Our newest member, Sean Thomas, if you haven't seen her, she's right here. Yeah. I personally appreciate her taking the time to come in. Julie Homer, who is and Shirley Williams over here. And so, Julie and Shelby were all part of pushing on DART that ultimately, I think, got us to where we are.
Absolutely.
We certainly know there's opportunity for more, but for a long time, I think they were giving us the Heisman and really didn't even want to talk to us. So, and also, I have to say, Mr. Williams over here, he kind of, this as well as anybody, he took this thing on originally going, hey, Plano's not getting what they deserve, and he pushed that through various members for various things for a long time. So anyway, I appreciate all 3 of these people. It's really great to have them here. So, you were talking about riders, and one of the things I want to jump to just a little bit, because there's a lot of other things I think we can, and we'll get to some questions here, but let's talk about safety a little bit. Because if you talk to most of our police officers or constables, they will say, one of the issues, there's a lot of benefits from these rides that are being, but there's also some safety issues. Is that being discussed at DART, and what kind of things might be implemented so that all of us feel safe when we're riding DART? Because I think that will increase ridership significantly. So any comments on that?
absolutely. So that's something we've discussed a lot. Oh, I should grab that for you.
Have to be pretty quick.
Anyway, that's something we've discussed a lot at the DART board, and I will tell you that the DART staff presents numbers saying that safety is improving, and we'll argue that safety is better on DART than in the DART member cities. And to be very fair to that point, there are numbers that can be pointed to there, but I think it's also important to remember that people live in the member cities 24 hours a day, and people may, even people who ride DART may ride 1 hour a day, or 2 hours a day. And so I don't know that that's an apples to apples comparison when you look at crime rates. I think you'd almost have to break it down more like crime per hour or something, given that nobody lives on DART. And so,
Couple has mine.
well, and that's another thing that I think we're working on from a safety perspective. I'll tell you, that's something I do think DART is serious about. It is very important to provide shelter for unhoused individuals. My wife and I are very involved in a homeless ministry called Our Calling. That's a wonderful homeless ministry, and that's very important. But DART is not a shelter. DART has a transit mission, and so it's important for the shelters to provide shelter and for DART to provide transit. So I think DART really has been serious about making sure that riders who ride on DART are riding from a starting point to a destination and not using DART as just a place to stay. In spite of those efforts, we know that that's going on. And so that's part of it.
Yeah, hopefully we can mitigate that.
But I'll tell you one last thing on safety. So something I have pressed and others have pressed, and I think the DART board actually is very receptive to this idea and really is pressing the DART staff on, is that there are two separate issues, both of which are vitally important. One is actual safety, where I think you can look at things, though they're very expensive, like a closed system and things of that nature, but that's certainly a discussion that I think could be had. And then the second is perceptions of safety. Because people are not going to get on until they feel safe. So you have to first make sure you're knocking safety out of the park, and then you have to make sure that along with knocking actual safety out of the park, you are also making people feel safe. And so
both great points. Yeah, well, we're going to have some questions in just a little bit, okay? Just don't forget it, okay? We're almost done up here, and I'll come and take questions and he can answer them. So one of the things that's going on as we talk about ridership and increasing it is, I noticed that the annual passes and some of the monthly passes are increasing in cost, and so there's clearly some revenue benefit there. What does DART expect that to do to ridership? As I think the annual pass is being discontinued, and the monthly pass is going from $96 to $126, which is a decent increase, percentage-wise. So, any comments on that at all?
So during DART's last budget process, that was a point of discussion, and some of the changes will have very little impact because, changes regarding the annual pass, for example, I think that's primarily something bought by businesses, and I think there are substitutes for that. So this is testing knowledge that's about 6 months old at this point, so I'm not totally fresh on this, but some of those changes that were made will have very little impact because the utilization numbers were low on certain types of passes already. And then on others, it will have some impact. And the DART staff actually models in these kind of economic models, some drop off in ridership with increase in price. The one that I was most concerned about was paratransit because, paratransit is a must. I mean, so paratransit is about 8% of DART's budget. And to me, it is the most important 8% and the 8% that can never be touched because, everything that DART is doing delivers a service, and there are people counting on that, so we have to take that seriously. But the people who rely on paratransit, which is a service for people with a physical or intellectual disability that prevents them from getting around, I mean, they are deeply dependent on that service, and so
we absolutely have to be mindful.
Yeah, we have to be mindful of that, and there's no reason that we should ever talk about touching paratransit. It's only 8% of DART's budget.
Unless we're improving it somehow.
Unless we're improving it, yes, absolutely. We should talk about improving it. But one thing that happened last year is that there was a proposal to increase the paratransit fare from, I think at one point it was from $3 to $5 or $6, then it went down to $4, and eventually we got it down to $3.50. It went from $3 to $3.50. And I was okay with that because, if you look at inflation over the period of time, it was actually less than catching up with historical inflation. And so, obviously you can't hold prices the same for 50 years, but we have to take care of our disabled community.
Yeah, I think most of us agree. So another, maybe a quick thing here. So one of the things that happens is in January 1st, 2029, we have an agreement now, this new deal discontinues bus routes, right? So
There are even before this new deal, there were the planned discontinuance of 2 bus routes in Plano. I believe that's now down to 1.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, though, there's been a lot of back and forth. But the 234 and the 254 are both underperforming on the performance metrics that DART looks at, which include things like I talked about, ridership and subsidy per rider. And the 241, by the way, which goes up Coit, comes from Dallas and goes up Coit, actually is a highly utilized local route, one of the most highly utilized of what are called the local routes. That's like the 200 series of DART routes, if you see a 2 at the beginning. And so that's one of the most highly utilized of those, the 241. And so that's, there are others that are not as highly utilized. And so I think when something is not highly utilized, you have to look at, is this meeting an actual community need? Or is there a better way to use these funds to deliver service to the community? And in that case, microtransit like GoLink might be a better solution, to get more people, because microtransit takes you from exactly where you are to exactly where you want to go. So if that can be accomplished for the same price as a bus route, then that's a better solution.
Oh, that's a great point, because I think a lot of times, a lot of us who have a lot of questions about DART see empty buses riding around, and we know that's not efficient. Now, maybe you're getting it at a piece in time or whatever, but anyway, so, okay, I just have 2 more questions, then we'll go to the audience. And one is, Plano is going to get a second board member, right? I think.
Well, Plano has 2 board members currently, although the second one is shared with Farmers Branch, that's Nathan Barberis. So 2 out of the 15. There's actually, if the legislature passes what the member cities are asking it to and what DART is asking it to, there's agreement on all of this now. This is the governance piece that I talked about that's less critical for Plano, because Plano already has the 2 seats, but there are cities like Addison, like the Park Cities and others, Glen Heights, that don't have, even a single seat on the DART board. So the idea of the governance changes is basically to make sure that no one city can have a majority of the board, so that you have to get buy-in from at least more than one city to get a majority on the DART board, which I think is a positive change. And the city of Dallas has agreed to reduce its vote share to 45%. Plano actually, like Dallas, will be diminished by this process, because Plano is it's currently allocated by population, and Plano is the 2nd most populous city of the 13 DART member cities. So kind of like in the US Senate, California, Texas, New York, Florida, get a little bit less per capita representation in the US Senate, because every state gets 2 representatives.
Is our second seat at risk?
No. So our second seat is not, so the size of the DART board is going, if all of this goes through on the governance end, the size of the DART board will increase, and there will be weighted voting that will let every member city have
diminishes our
one
influence.
vote. But the 1 vote might be worth half a vote, or it's all weighted.
So with that second seat, one of the questions I know that some people have is, and it was expressed by maybe even some folks in this room, is they very much would like to see somebody on that board that is a frequent rider of DART. So what do you think about that? I'm putting you on the spot.
I mean, well, hey, that's why you come to things like this, to get put on the spot. I mean, I think that it's good to have perspectives from people who frequently utilize services, and so DART actually has a citizen advisory committee, and that really has that role. But I mean, certainly, I think that's something that Councilmember Thomas and other council members can consider in making appointments, if they deem that important. But I think, so that's really a council decision, not my decision. But I would say that, everybody pays into DART, whether you ride it or not. And frankly, I ride DART, not all that often, because there's not all that much transit near where I live in West Plano. But I do ride DART from time to time. I rode the 239 down Communications and through Addison and to the Addison Transit Center, and transferred and took another bus to the church that that our family goes to because we wanted to check that out. And, you know, I mean, I used to ride, when it was fairly new, I used to ride the Red Line to and from work the summer between my junior and senior years of college. My dad would actually drop me off at the station in Plano because, again, it wasn't, you know, near where we lived, but, you know, I was home that summer
Yeah.
working in downtown Dallas, and, you know, and I would take the Red Line. So certainly I've got experience, you know, with riding DART. I do think when you're appointed as a DART member, it's important to test out the system. And, you know, I mean, my kids love to ride trains, so, you know.
All kids do. Yeah.
All kids do. So
I was talking to a constable back here. He's talking about his grandkid riding the Silver Line. They had fun. So here's my last question. A bit of a wild card maybe, but we have a new board. And so, I don't know, maybe there's an answer to this or maybe there's not. And then we'll jump up here and get some questions. But do you think there might be anything surprising from this new board that you might share with us that go, hey guys, here's something that maybe is surprising or you hadn't thought about? Anything?
So when you say new board, you mean new dartboard?
Yeah,
or
the new dartboard. New dartboard.
Okay, so
With the changes to the dartboard, I guess.
oh, I see. If they go through, so as a clarification, none of those changes have gone through yet. You know, it's still the same.
Yeah, assuming they.
Yeah, which would happen in the legislative session next year.
I guess if they don't,
So
we missed our 6-year window to vote out, right?
September 2027, and that's true. That's true. But I think there's reason to be confident that those changes will go through with the member cities all accepting them and the DART board accepting them. You know, and we passed a resolution to that effect. So I think it's unlikely that the legislature would refuse to give effect to the agreement of the member cities and DART. But you know, on an issue that has no fiscal impact to the state. But you know, advice for that board, whether I'm on it or I'm not. You know, I mean, you know, I would say just keep working on service because, you know, this deal. While we need to keep working on, you know, the RTC funding and, you know, another entity to take over regional rail and things that can help the money going back to member cities increase from the, you know, the 10% sort of guarantee to the 25% goal that everyone's shooting for. While we need to keep working on that, you know, the funding piece in terms of money coming back from DART to the member cities is kind of set by an interlocal agreement for the next 6 years. So, you know, whatever I or anybody else thinks of that, you know, that piece is kind of set now so that, you know, but you saw two numbers that were part of that problem, right? The number Plano contributes and certain other member cities contribute, and the money being spent in Plano and certain other member cities. And that second part, I think, is really the challenge for the DART board going forward. How does DART deliver more and better services in cities that are currently underserved, like Plano?
That's a great point. Thanks. So let's start back here. This gentleman had a question. I'll come back. If you guys have questions, raise your hand. I'll come and give you the mic.
So, this is regarding the safety. How does Plano compare with, say, some other cities like Fort Worth?
So I will tell you, Plano has been recognized as the safest city in Texas. We have former police chief Greg Russian right here, who for many years was the chief of police for Plano PD, an excellent public servant. His wife Cindy.
I was more talking in terms of DART. So in the last 10 years, how has Plano's safety improved on DART? Right?
Oh, so are you saying like on DART services in Plano, how is safety compared to safety throughout the? Compared to Fort Worth, which is not in DART.
Right. The train services in and around Fort Worth.
So there is TRE, which goes between Dallas and Fort Worth, but Fort Worth is not a DART member city. I don't believe any cities. Well, no, I was going to say that I don't believe that any cities that are predominantly located in Tarrant County are DART member cities, but I need to be careful about that because I don't know exactly where Irving is county boundary wise, but certainly once you get over toward the Fort Worth area, you know, DART is 13 member cities that are primarily clustered around Dallas. I think with the possible exception of Glen Heights, which is due south of Dallas, I think all of them directly border Dallas, and that's why it's called Dallas Area Rapid Transit. So Fort Worth is not part of DART, I guess.
Okay, so one of the things that I heard was and I've experienced it personally. Sure. Fort Worth is appears to be a lot more cleaner. The services on the train systems over there, a lot more cleaner and a lot more safer. And even in the evening, I would see women and small kids traveling alone. In the Plano area, when I used to travel, I used to be worried because you never knew who was sitting next to you, and because there's no policing or anything like that. Fort Worth, I did observe policing and strict ticketing. So that's what I observed. I mean, so I do not know
Well,
whether there's been any plans to do that.
Thank you for sharing that observation. So I will tell you that yes, I don't have any firsthand knowledge outside of the DART service area because the numbers that are presented to the DART board are DART numbers, but I have heard people express that sentiment before, about Trinity Metro over in the Fort Worth area and DCTA, the Denton County Transit Authority, maybe there being a different perception of safety in those systems. And so I think that just reflects a challenge for DART to keep working on that. And that's something that I am not alone in this, but, safety is a high priority, top priority for all DART board members. I've heard that articulated a lot. And so I think it's a continued area of improvement for DART to keep working on that.
Anthony, when I was on P&Z, and you probably know this because I know you watched a lot of the meetings, is as we talked about some of the evolutions of this system, frequently safety would come up and we challenged DART. We need to push this forward, partly reality, partly perception. And so, thanks for the question. And I think a lot of us feel that, we need to focus on that if we're going to get the ridership up.
Absolutely.
Emma, you got a question?
Yes. So I'm a member with an organization called Keep Dart and Plan. So I think you guys know how I feel. But I was actually wondering if you have any recommendations for folks in this room or members of the Chamber of Commerce and how they can help improve ridership in the city.
Well, first of all, Ember, thank you for your involvement in this issue and thank you for that question. I appreciated also your comments that you made at that, Friday DART board meeting when the, kind of compromise financial settlement was voted on. And I know you've been very, very involved in this issue, so thank you for being engaged. Whether we agree on every policy position or not, and I know we don't, but I really appreciate it when citizens get as involved as you've gotten, and I know you've been a leader in maybe the leader in Keep Dart in Plano, and so thank you for your engagement. As far as increasing ridership, I think part of it is delivering services that are tailored to the community's needs, something that I've really pushed on. And to DART's credit, I think DART is being responsive to this, albeit, imperfectly so far, we're not there yet, but the area plans are designed to try to sit down with member cities and get member city feedback about what services are most valuable in each of the 13 member cities. And I think that is a positive change for DART, from what I viewed as a more one-size-fits-all mentality in previous years, because Plano has different transit needs from Dallas and different transit needs from Irving and Garland and even Glen Heights, way down on the southern end of the service area, and so I think that's a positive change. So I think things like Plano needs the legacy circulator, Plano needs more micro transit, just because Plano is not developed with the same development pattern that, say, Dallas, some areas of Dallas are. So that's why in the last budget I pushed for true single zone citywide GO link in Plano and DART picking up the whole cost of the legacy circulator. Those are things I will continue to advocate for some form of that. That may even be the form of more money coming back to Plano so that Plano could contract with a vendor to provide micro transit, somebody like VIA that I know the council has looked at, as opposed to DART delivering GO link, whatever works best for Plano and whatever works best for each individual member city. But that's a big part of it, is tailoring services to the unique needs of each of the 13 member cities, including micro transit where that's appropriate, and frankly, being open to change on services that are underutilized or high subsidy per rider. I think another part of it is, is just trying to, we talked a lot about safety and perceptions of safety. That is directly tied to ridership, so that's another big part of it. And then I think, in addition to that, it's probably also just continuing to think about how can DART provide a better experience of getting from point A to point B, because I frequently, there was during that, this year's winter storm, it's kind of becoming almost annual, right? You know, like things shut
Please
down.
don't say that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess if I'm jinxing it, it would be the reverse, right? And we don't have a winter storm next year. So hopefully, but we can hope that's how things work, I guess. But
Whichever
anyway,
bad way it is.
yeah, it just jinxing not work that way. Okay.
We now know who to blame. That's all I care about.
Okay. Anyway, so during that winter storm, you know, there was a dartboard meeting that I attended via Zoom because, you know, it would not have been safe to drive down to Dallas for that. But anyway, you know, granted the roads were totally clear because nobody could drive. It was unsafe. But you know, I Googled, and you know, Google Maps will provide you. You know, this is how long it will take to drive. This is how long it will take on public transit. This is how long it will take to walk. This is how long it will take on your bike. Well, you know, the driving number was like 26 minutes, and the public transit number was something like an hour and 35 minutes. And you know, as long as that's the choice that people are provided with, then most people who have private transportation are going to utilize private transportation instead of DART, and that makes DART a service of last resort. And I don't think DART should be a service of last resort. I don't think that is what we should be aiming for at DART. I think DART should aim to be a service that's useful to people, you know, across cities and across geographies and across socioeconomic strata. And for DART to do that, it has to compete better on how long it takes to get from point A to point B. Now, obviously, that brings up the question of frequency, and then that brings up the question of funding. I know which you know is something we have to discuss. So then you end up with this chicken or the egg, because you have a service that is not all that useful, frankly, to a lot of potential customers right now, and it would cost a lot of money to make it more useful to those potential customers. That money is not there, and that's not because of this 10% settlement. Even in year 6, DART will give 7.5% of sales tax revenue back to the member cities. For one thing, sales tax revenue will grow so much more than that in all likelihood over the next 6 years, unless we never know, but unless we have a major economic recession, sales tax collections are likely to grow much more than that, such that DART's budget will actually increase even with this.
Yeah, and if they then can figure out how to use that. Hey, so one of the things I just wanted to jump in is you're talking about this is rhythm is important, where people get used to doing it, and it's not a last resort. It's part of my habit. So, hey, this young lady here is typing away furiously, and I'm going to jump over here and let her ask a question.
Sorry, I'm taking notes. So you are on the dartboard and you vote certain way. So what informs your votes? Are you meeting with council on like the city's goals, or do you meet with riders, or what goes into that process?
Well, thanks for asking. I mean, all of the above. I certainly talk with council members, though. I mean, it's very rare for any council member or the mayor, for that matter, to express an opinion on a DART issue. Really, the only time I remember that happening whatsoever is related to these negotiations about a funding agreement with the member cities, which I thought was very, very appropriate. I mean, the same as a U.S. senator from Texas, represents the whole United States of America, but also uniquely represents Texas. I represent the entire DART service area, and I also uniquely represent Plano, and so I wanted to get those views. I talk with riders. I'm often the last or one of the last dartboard members to leave dartboard meetings because I'm talking with folks. I stuck around after that Friday meeting that you were at, Ember. I stuck around and talked with folks, and a lot of the data folks, and whose opinions I greatly value, whether we agree on everything or not. I appreciate their engagement, and they've got some good points that are helpful, and so. So absolutely, I take riders' views into account. I take the views of everybody in the Plano community and in the DART service area into account. And then I use my own judgment, hopefully honed through 8 years on the Plano City Council and now about 1 year on the DART board, to try to come up with the best solution.
My experience has been working with you when I was on PNC and watching you in council. You're very open to talking to all sides, and you do your homework, and you make a decision that you think is wisest. And so I'm sure that won't be any different here. Mr. Bill Lana.
Step up here.
You're going outside?
No, just right here. Good to see you, Anthony.
Hey, good to see you too.
One thing before I start, I just want to acknowledge that you're one of the best at telling people thank you. And so
Well, thank
just
you
to
for that.
acknowledge your hard work on council and then taking on this role while being a father and a husband and participating in these other nonprofits. I think it's important for everyone to know, and a lot of people in this room probably do, but it's important for us to share with other people. This is a volunteer position. This guy's giving his time. Even our council members, they make a little stipend for a meeting, but they have jobs and families and all sorts of other things going on. And so anyway, just
Well, thank you for that, Bill. That means a lot to me.
Gratitude right back at you.
Well, that's really kind of you. I appreciate that, my friend. And, it's an honor to do this. By the way, tiny correction, just because I always try to be punctiliously accurate. Dartboard members do get $50 a month. So now I can go to Wendy's.
That would barely cover your.
Sorry. We do get free passes. Amber's right. We get free passes. Although I'm actually pretty sure I'm paid to use Dart since I've been on the board. I did not know that at first, and so in fact I know I'm paid to use Dart since I've been on the board.
Play.
Yeah, no, right, but no. I actually don't. I probably should get the free pass, but I'm actually paid to use Dart since I've been on the board. But you're right. So
I was just curious, honestly.
No, Amber, you're right, and also that's important to know. So Dartboard members do get something for their service, but yes, you're right, Bill. I mean, I told the same joke on the Plano City Council that anybody who would do this for the money is not qualified to manage the city's or Dart's budget, because if you think this amount of work is the best way to earn $50 a month plus a transit pass, then you can't do math. So because the per hour doesn't work out that way.
Now I'm going to continue to prove that I'm a student of yours and I've followed you for 8 years. And so I'm going to turn my opportunity for one question into two.
There you go. And if you've really been following me, you'll turn it into 3 or 4.
So my first comment, if you will, has to do with transit and my love for downtown Plano and the fact that between Parker Road and City Line, we have about 3,000 parking spots. And so I hear people talk about a local shuttle or commuter in Legacy West, but I'm like, we have East Plano, we have this jewel over there of downtown, and we have these parking that's already built, that's underutilized. And Plano always talks about transit, about people from Allen coming here to ride. I think we need to frame the conversation that Plano is the destination. Downtown is a destination.
Absolutely.
And if we align our policy with land use, with the fact that we have these stations and potentially, I would love to see a trolley type car that only runs from Parker Road to downtown to City Line, just right there. And so are there any things like that in the Dart service area that utilize existing infrastructure to create a better system?
So one, that's a great idea. I love this. And to your question, that's an example of, on any board, you want to listen to people. I would not have thought of that myself, but I love the idea, Bill. And so that is how these ideas come about, listening to riders, listening to community members. I think especially given the financial disparity between Plano's contribution to Dart and Dart's investment back in Plano, it would be very fair to ask for a service like that. So I probably will.
Imagine going to the Dickens Festival, not having to park on an empty grass lot that some guy owns in downtown, getting on a train ride and being able to show up in downtown. And yet we don't do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Bill. I'm going to look into that. So I think that's fantastic. By the way, and I've said this to you before, but if you could send me an email on that, and by the way, y'all can email me Ricciardelli@dart.org, I think it is. Yeah, dart.org. I almost said .gov because it is a governmental entity, so I always thought it should be dart.gov. But anyway, it's dart.org. Ricciardelli@dart.org. Email me that because by the time I go home and put the kids to bed, there's a chance I'll forget. But if you email me, I'll remember.
Okay, and the second part, which is completely unrelated to the first part, and this comes a little bit from the fact that you're also an attorney. But is there any concern from anyone, because watching this process, and I'm going to paint in some broad strokes here, but we have public policy, and we have open meetings laws, and we had a council call for a recall election, and then we had what appeared as an outsider as these negotiations going on with the promise of rescinding an election. But I never saw council put an agenda item and actually publicly discuss those negotiations. They just did the negotiations. And so is there any concern that there were promises made of a future vote to rescind for money when the money was really rightly Dart's?
So I will say that no, I have no such concerns. I mean, negotiations were going on, and I think you've been following the council for years. Everyone knows that the city manager makes recommendations to council, right? And that doesn't mean the council is going to vote that way. Sometimes the council does not. But certainly for me in my 8 years on the council, the city manager's recommendation as the professional CEO of the city was an important data point. So I think there's a difference between saying, I can guarantee the council is going to vote this way, and if this is what's on the table, I would recommend to the council, you would earn my recommendation, as the mayor or as the city manager, that the council vote for this. And I think it's totally appropriate to do that in negotiations. The other thing is, I know the council had discussions in executive sessions, over the past few months. I don't know what the content of those discussions were. One thing I know from my 8 years on the Plano City Council is that they scrupulously followed the letter of the Open Meetings Act, because Paige Mims would not let you do anything other than that, nor would anybody on the Plano City Council or the Plano staff try to do anything other than that. So, but in certain instances, certain types of negotiations, you can discuss in executive session legal issues relating to things like potential agreements and things like that. So, what the City Council discussed in executive session, over the last few months, I don't know. I know it was discussed when I was on the council, but one thing I can say is that whatever was discussed was proper under state law to be discussed in executive session. And so, kind of to the gist of your question, the Open Meetings Act is an important law, so I appreciate your attention to it, but I'm very confident that Plano did not do anything that would...
I think the thing, Anthony, is that a lot of us would have loved, as appropriate as possible, to hear more of what was being discussed.
Yes.
But anyway, that's just a comment.
And Gary, I would say to your point, Bill and Gary, I do think that, that was feedback the dartboard got also, and Randall Bryant, the chair of the dartboard, got that. I mean, I even, I'll share that it was a private conversation, and I try to keep those private, but this is what I said, so I won't say anything that anybody else said. I'll just say what I said, which I guess I can reveal my own statements. But, I told Randall Bryant, who's the chair of the dartboard, who I like, by the way, whether we agree on everything or not, I think he's a dynamic leader. I think he's done a lot to try to bring cities together through this process, and I think he's acting in complete good faith. And so I really have a lot of respect for Randall Bryant, and so I talk with him from time to time, which one-on-one, which as is permissible under the Open Meetings Act, because there are 15 members, so 8 would be a quorum, so one-on-one is very much permissible on the dartboard under the State Open Meetings Act. And and I told him that I thought that we should be having more discussions at the dartboard, and I think that I think that residents of all of the member cities probably felt that way too, that more open discussion by the dartboard and by all of the city councils probably would have been welcomed.
So
that being said, nothing was violated.
And maybe going forward, that can be better. So I got a question back here.
Project statistics, I'm believe that. Percentage, to me, it really doesn't mean anything to me without the numbers behind it.
Yeah.
I hear this on the TV, the radio, all of it, okay? Without the numbers, it's meaningless. Okay, that's one.
I agree, and a 10-second comment on that. I think this is actually an extraordinarily hard issue to explain to people who might be a casual voter who don't pay that close of attention. If somebody's going to invest 5 to 10 minutes trying to understand this issue, it's actually really hard to understand in that amount of time, because there are so many financial moving pieces, so many service moving pieces relating to ridership, subsidy per rider, and all of the different routes. And so you're spot on.
So if the data is out there, is it public?
Oh yeah, I mean there is more public data than you could ever possibly.
Where can they find this percentage versus in the same sentence with the data, or same graph or whatever?
Sorry, so that last part, I'm not sure I understood. What are you looking for in the same graph, percentages? Or?
So you say, okay, our increase in ridership is 17%. Okay, in the same paragraph or sentence actually, it's gone from X to Z. Okay, which would back up the percentage.
So DART does prepare charts. In fact, at our meeting on Tuesday, there was the first quarter quarterly ridership report, and that has, I believe, both gross numbers and percentage trends.
Okay.
You know that you're looking for. So that would be a place to find that. But yes, I mean I agree. That's something that could, you know, when I first came onto the DART board. I had already been on the Plano City Council. I was in my 8th year, toward the end of my 8th year on the Plano City Council, and I was not aware of those reports, so they probably could be better publicized because, you know, there are other kinds of documents that get more attention. Those quarterly ridership reports probably fly under the radar.
The other thing you mentioned was that there was going to be a company that was going to buy a chunk of DART.
So it wouldn't be a company buying a chunk of DART. Basically, what Chair Bryant and others are trying to do is get the regional rail component, so things like, you know, maybe the Silver Line and the TRE, to be not funded by DART, but instead funded by a different public funding source, like maybe the RTC, which is the Regional Transportation Council, which is funded, you know, for example, through federal grants and stuff like that, could take on some or all of that expense, or some new entity could be created to do that. So, but it wouldn't be like a buyout from a company so that it becomes private. It would be like a different governmental entity.
That was my concern. So it wasn't going to be to a venture capitalist, okay, or to private equity.
Well, I hear you, and you know, nothing wrong with private equity. My wife.
Bill Lyle was actually buying.
Yeah.
Bill Lyle was buying it all, just for the record.
Well, oh yeah, you know, big money bill. There we go. But no, but you know, in all seriousness, though, I understand your concern because there was like kind of a lower, you know, more affordable priced steakhouse that I won't name it, but like I used to love it about 15 years ago, and it actually got bought out. And the quality of the meat just deteriorated, and I don't eat there anymore. So I know what you're talking about, and we don't want that with transit services. So no, it talks about another government.
Anything in the US.
Yeah, or yeah. I mean, when somebody else takes something over, you want the quality to stay high. I'm with you.
Hey, Anthony, one thing I'd be interested to hear you report on is how does ridership play a metric in bonuses to staff at DART?
Amen.
Because to me,
So-
that is the most important metric for public transit. I mean, we want to increase, we want to get the more people, the more effective we're being, the less people on the road. So to me, and I also had a conversation with Randall Bryant, and he expressed that was very important to me, that we really, that's the number one metric we should be looking at, reporting on it. Tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is a fantastic question, Julie, and the answer is it does not. Shockingly to me, for a transit agency, the standards for paying bonuses to DART executives do not currently include any standard related to ridership whatsoever. That is the reason that I voted against those standards, as did 3 or 4 other board members. I can't remember exactly how many, but they did pass. But I voted against them. As I think you were kind of hinting at, I thought it was unthinkable that you would have a transit agency whose primary job it is to move people, give people rides from point A to point B, and that ridership numbers would not be any part of the criteria for awarding bonuses to executives. To be fair to those who passed those standards, the argument was that with some money going back to the member cities, that DART funding would not be increased this year, and that we could not expect to see an increase in ridership without increased funding. Now, I will tell you, there obviously is a correlation between, funding and frequency and ridership. We talked about it in response to Ember's question, but, out of I believe 1.8 billion, when you include all the pieces, budget for DART, the 5% general mobility program, which is the funding that's being repurposed for the 5% for the first year of this 6-year interlocal agreement under the current compromise, is $42.59 million. So that's actually less than 5%, a lot less than 5%, because there are other components other than sales tax in DART's budget. It's 5% of sales tax. But so that being said, you know, even taking that money out, you know, I think there had to be a goal to still increase ridership, or at least keep it the same, or at least say it won't decrease by more than, you know, this. By the way, I wouldn't have been in favor of a goal that said, you know, it'll only decrease a little bit. But I mean, even that is not in there. And so, you know, there has to be some goal tied to ridership, even if, you know, even if DART feels like there are funding challenges. And again, sales tax revenues, as you mentioned, Julie, you know, I didn't even know that the most recent number for Plano has gone up from 120 million to 131 million. Sales tax collections continue to grow. So even with some money going back to the member cities, I think we could be increasing ridership. I also think that, you know, you have to innovate. And in our time serving together on the Plano City Council, you know, you and Shelby and me and now Shun, and, you know, the attitude of Plano, even during COVID, was, you know, this is a challenge, but we're a city of excellence and we deliver excellent services. So to me, there would never be a circumstance where you would say, well, I mean, maybe COVID where you're literally shutting things down in the transit context, but, you know, although actually I think DART ran through COVID. Maybe somebody can check me on that. That was before my time on the DART board, but.
The buses were equally full.
I better not comment on that, but anyway, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, so anyway though, you know, I still think, I mean, when you're a transit agency and your job is to move people from point A to point B, you have to have a ridership goal, and you cannot be dispensing money for bonuses, which are rewarded for exceptional performance above the, you know, just the standard passing grade. You cannot have bonuses being awarded unless ridership is increasing. That's my view. So thank you very much.
Really, it's some fun discussion here. You know what? We're at the point we have time for 2 more questions, and there's a couple people who want to answer. And so, or ask them. So, here you go.
I want to first of all thank Anthony. He knows how many emails he gets from me a week.
Well, I'm happy to help, Sonia, and you know, your neighborhood needs to be taken care of with respect to what's going on with the Silver Line and the maintenance facility behind it.
Our neighborhood is the neighborhood of 122 homes, right behind the Silver Line on Shiloh. I mean, it is like I could throw a rock and hit it. But one thing I just do want to say is, make a joke that mine is very serious about paratransit. My family has a bet how long they can be with me before I bring up DART. Christmas, I made it 12 and a half minutes.
I thought you were
They were
going to
amazed.
say
They were amazed.
Wow, well, good for you, Sonia.
Mine's paratransit because all of you have met some of my friends. Brenda is 78 years old, and she's been riding DART for 35 years from Garland. And Pam is 64, and she's been riding DART for 30 years. It's so important for them to be able to get from Garland to church. That's our community, and we would miss them if they were not there. When that issue came up with the pricing, I saw 170,000 people so shook over that. I did some research. I have a question. A lot of people don't realize that the paratransit is not a DART. It's a DART.
Yes, so it is a DART service, but it's provided by a contractor called Transdev, and is that what you're getting at? It's a
Yes.
third-party vendor
It's
that
a
DART
third-party
contracts with.
vendor. My question is this: how do you all go about the people you had before were excellent. Apparently, these people one lady was left on the streets of Farmers Branch until midnight. Now,
There have been well-documented issues with Transdev, and obviously that's an existing contract, but I think that's something that I am, concerned about, and I'm certainly not alone on the DART board or on the DART staff in being concerned about that.
let me ask you this. How long is that contract for? But that company is not as big as Texas is. They're not even from Texas.
Well, and that's true. And in fact, we took a spring break trip to Charleston and Savannah, and in one of those cities, I think it was in Savannah, there were buses that said something like powered by Transdev, or they were being run by Transdev. So yeah, Transdev is a big company. To your question about the end date, I do not remember the end date on that contract off the top of my head, but that's something that we need to seriously look at. And yeah, they're not meeting expectations. And so, that's, and as I said earlier, I view paratransit as the most important service that DART delivers. Even compared to other services, you just absolutely have to get it right for our disabled community. They're dependent on that, and by the way, I also want to say, on the point about the withdrawal election, when the withdrawal election was on the ballot, the Plano City Council was looking at options for Plano to deliver paratransit. So there was still going to be paratransit either way that vote turned out, and that's something I know every member city is committed to. But yes, I'm concerned about TransDev's performance. It's something we've discussed at the DART board, and I think whenever that contract ends, I think the DART board's going to take a real hard look at that one.
Here's our last question.
All righty, Anthony. First of all, great job. Great job tonight.
Thank you, John.
Appreciate your presentation in this Q&A. Your presentation, though, in the Q&A raised a few questions. One, you mentioned the board's currently 15, but you talked about this piece of legislation hopefully going to the state. But you mentioned it increasing, but what would be the size, what's the proposed new size of the board, and how many would Plano have on that?
That is a great question, and that has gone back and forth so much that I actually cannot remember exactly where it landed. I've seen numbers as high as 25. I think the number that was landed on was maybe lower than that, and involved complicated weighted voting where the city of Dallas would have 45% of the weighted vote. Plano would still have 2 reps, and I can't even remember the exact number on the percentage of the weighted vote, but yeah, so the DART board used to be 25 members long before my time on the DART board or the council. I've heard that led to very long discussions, which we've had some very long discussions to begin with, which, clearly I played no part in because I talk so little, but now nobody believes that. But anyway, no, I definitely contributed to that. But anyway, we've had long discussions anyway. So yeah, that increasing the size of the board, which is the proposal, whether it's 20 or 25, again, I can't remember what number we landed on, because the governance is a little bit less nailed down on the exacts than the funding piece was, and 2, the governance piece was less important to Plano, because like Dallas, Plano will actually have diminished voting strength versus what we have right now as a result of this. But I think it's also fair to do that, because every member city should have representation. It's kind of like no taxation without representation, right? And so anyway, I don't remember the exact number. Increasing the board size does present some concern about efficiency, but I think that's the price of every city having at least one representative, so that even if they only have half a vote on the weighted system, they've got somebody at the table.
But at this point, you don't expect us to get more than the 2 we have.
No, I don't expect us to get more than the 2 that we have. And in fact,
I'm going to jump, because I know people want to get out here. I'm going to jump to the next thing. You mentioned the issue of riders from outside who aren't, from cities that aren't contributing. How do people from McKinney or Prosper or whatever, how do they buy tickets? And would it be as simple as saying, show us your ID, and if it's not a Plano address, your ticket charge instead of $3.50 is $7.50?
So you could do that. So yeah, the way they buy tickets is the same as everybody else. You go to one of the machines. You either get on a bus and you hand fare to or not hand fare. There's a machine. When you get on, the bus drivers here, with the big wheel, and there's a machine to their right, like between where you get on and the bus driver, where you have to pay your fare, tap your phone or your card or something to pay your fare. And light rail, there are vending machines at the light rail stations where you can buy that. So people from outside of the service area buy it the same as people from inside the service area. If it's feasible, I would love to charge those outside of the service area more, because they're not paying the taxes for it that we are, and so that would be fair. But the other thing that DART has definitely looked at is parking, because at, like, say, the park and ride at the Parker Station on the red and sometimes orange lines in Plano, there's a gigantic parking lot there, and people come in, that's just down 75 from Allen. People come in from Frisco and McKinney, and and so there's a valid complaint where, which frankly is the same as like, Arbor Hills Nature Preserve, where, you can go there on a Sunday afternoon and, the parking lot's full. And I do sometimes wonder, like, hey, we're paying, Plano residents are paying taxes for this. Is everybody who's taking up the parking spots that we can't get from Plano? But, say la vie, unless you're going to have somebody, checking IDs at the entrances.
Hopefully they're
Yeah, opposite.
The last thing is,
eating lunch and their sales tax.
Yeah, hopefully they're eating lunch. And that's the thing, Julie just made a great point. DART is funded by sales tax. So, I mean, if they're spending in the city of Plano, then they are contributing toward that. But that being said, people who live in Plano undoubtedly spend more in Plano than people who live in different cities spend in Plano. And so, I mean, that makes it would be fair to charge them more. DART has looked at, to wrap up that answer quickly, DART has looked at, having a certain part of that parking lot dedicated to just people who have some kind of pass that proves they're a resident of a member city.
okay,
But
so
more needs to be done.
with regard to the 6-year opt-out window, that was the vote that was put on the calendar and then withdrawn. Is that 6-year window a calendar timeframe window? Like, we have all of 2026 to potentially, if the citizens don't like this deal, can they press the city council to go back and reverse it and put it back on the ballot before the end of?
So two things about that. It has to be on a uniform election date. So it can't just be any date that you decide to have a standalone DART election. So it is the entire calendar year 2026, as it was the entire calendar year 2020 and will be the entire calendar year of 2032. But it has to be on a uniform election date. Even primaries are not considered a uniform election date. So it could be like the May election date that it was on. It could be the November election date. I don't know if there are others. That being said, once you put it down. Sure.
My point is 5%, which is the guaranteed amount, working toward 10%, right?
Yeah.
5% is the guaranteed amount. 5% of 130 million is $6.5 million. So over the 6 years, we would get at the low side 36 to 38
Well, and
million.
it does go up to 10%. So yeah, the number
Okay, so
is
10%
the
you get
guarantee
13.
is north of 60 million for Plano, but yeah.
Okay, so 60 million is less than 1 year of what we've been getting screwed over in Plano for the last decade. And so the city council seems to have allowed DART off the hook for giving us a refund of 1/10 or less of what they've been robbing us of for the last decade. That seems like a horrible deal, and I think we should press the city council to put this back on the ballot, let the citizens of Plano vote for it in November.
So I started this evening by saying that my role is appointed by the city council, and I no longer have a seat on the city council. So I just, I don't feel like it would be appropriate for me to comment on how the city council should or shouldn't vote. I mean, they appointed me, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue serving. But as a citizen, you can advocate whatever viewpoint you want, John. I have my own personal viewpoint that I'm not going to state right at the moment, for the reasons I just articulated. But
Can I add one thing that's relevant to what you
Certainly,
said?
yeah.
Just the idea of a recall election, John. To do something by petition is what I'm trying to say. And so the citizens could put it on the ballot. And I have an email from Paige Mims that lays out the signatures we would need and how it could be.
Yeah, there's certainly the power of initiative to put something on the ballot.
If you want to
Yeah.
get 14,000 signatures, the citizens can put it back on for November.
Okay, cool.
So I'll give you your email and I'll send you the information.
Okay.
Because I checked into it.
Thank you,
weeks ago.
appreciate it.
Yep.
Hey, folks, thanks everybody for coming out. It's really fun to see some of our prior and former city council people here. Thank you for coming out. We appreciate you coming out. Plano Citizens Coalition is, we're ramping it up. We're really focused on delivering good meetings and good educational things for the citizens. So we're going to continue to move forward with this. But I really want to thank Anthony after a long day of working, and I know you were scrambling around because we talked a few times. But I really appreciate it. It just shows his continued willingness to serve this community. And I appreciate it, and I think we all do. Anthony, a great session tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you all. I know what I said at the beginning. We've got a room full of dedicated public servants. Thank you all for your community.
I'm going to turn it over to Carson just to say the final words, our new president of Plano Citizens Coalition.
Good evening, thank you, Gary, thank you, Anthony, once again. Guys, this video will also be available on YouTube, Facebook, but more importantly, stay involved. If you're not signed up for our newsletter, please see Gary or myself. We'll get you signed up. We have a lot of events, and this may turn into a multi-point series with really input from our citizens to come and speak to some of our elected officials in April and as we move forward into the year. So thank you for being here this evening. Have a safe and wonderful drive.